Human beings have been fermenting food, intentionally and unintentionally, for thousands of years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and honestly, as long as we have been storing energy-rich foods, they have absolutely been fermenting.
And today, it's found everywhere, from Japanese soy sauce to French cheese.
Something like a third of all the foods we consume, even in the Western world, have some type of fermented product in them.
But here in the U.S., one regional cuisine has set itself apart by embracing the power of fermentation.
I truly feel that Southern cuisine is the only truly unique and uniquely American cuisine.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This is The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home in North Carolina at the crossroads of the South. This week, from moonshine to chow chow, fermentation's weird and surprising history in the South, and how people are using the power of microbes to innovate Southern cuisine today.
Hi, Anissa. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
This is Brett Taubman. I recently called him up at his home in Boone, North Carolina.
I'm a professor here at Appalachian State University in the Department of Chemistry and Fermentation Sciences, and I direct the Fermentation Sciences program.
He's also the author of Southern Culture on the Fizz, a book all about the important role that fermentation has played in the evolution of food in the South.
So yeah, without fermentation, so many foods would be a lot less accessible to us and a lot less delicious too.
Brett's always been interested in food chemistry, but his path to creating a whole program for fermentation science at App State actually started with a specific type of fermentation.
To be completely honest, it was the brewing aspect of it, because I had already started brewing as a graduate student and a postdoc, and saw that as a real opportunity, not only to pursue my passion in foods and flavors, but also to use that as a method to teach undergraduates, take, the more abstract concepts of chemistry and give them something more concrete to sort of wrap their brains around.
So you started from beer, basically.
Exactly, right? Exactly. It's a good gateway drug into chemistry.
Clearly. Literally. So I'm really interested in this, and this is something that I've always wondered about. How did people first start eating fermented food? Because originally they must have been like, oh, this is just rotten food, right? Like, where did the idea to start eating it come from?
Yeah, and it's funny that you call it rotting food because it essentially is. Fermentation is often referred to as a controlled form of rotting because you're just controlling the bacteria that really are doing that breaking down of the food products. But it probably goes all the way back to the time when we were early hominids. And in fact, there was a paper that came out a couple of years ago that expressed the external fermentation hypothesis. So this external fermentation hypothesis, which I discuss in the book, talks about how fermentation may be the real reason why we were able to evolve from early hominids into modern humans, where our guts shrank by a third and our brains grew by a factor of 3.
Brett says that most evolutionary scientists believe that early humans found a way to use less energy to break down raw food and access more nutrients in their diet. That extra energy then went toward developing their brains instead of maintaining a big and complicated digestive system. And that would mean they were either cooking with fire or, as the external fermentation hypothesis suggests, fermenting raw food in order to sort of pre-digest it.
And that then allowed our guts to shrink and our brains to grow. So as long as there's recorded history, we have been fermenting foods, and probably a very long time before then.
But it's only recently that we've come to actually understand the science behind all of this. I mean, personally, I learned how to make yogurt from my grandmother when I was like 10, and it was just this almost magical process of like you warm up the milk, you add the little leftover yogurt from the last batch, and you just leave it in the microwave overnight, and then you have yogurt. But I never thought of that as fermenting.
Right. And it really is seemingly a magical process. And that's why, I mean, we didn't know what microbes were until the late 19th century. I mean, were able to visualize them with microscopy as early as the 17th century, but nobody knew that those little cells that they were seeing under microscopes were actually living single-celled organisms. And the English would refer to the yeast that they were using to inoculate batches of beer. They referred to it as God is good. And
wow.
They definitely viewed it as like a magical or a divine process, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the science. I mean, you explained this in a very long and complicated way in your book, but can you give me like the sort of simple version of how fermentation actually works?
Yeah, two of the main processes are alcoholic fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, which they're pretty simple. Most metabolic processes start with glycolysis, where you take in a molecule of glucose.
Okay, so ask a scientist to give you a simple answer, and it will be fascinating, but still probably not simple. But basically, in these two main types of fermentation, food begins to break down with the assistance of microbes. Bacteria or molds or some type of enzyme. When that happens, the cells create a substance that is toxic to them. So they convert it to either lactic acid or alcohol. And voila, you have fermented food.
Yeah, so through that fermentation process, not only do we make the foods more nutritionally accessible to us, but the flavor compounds that are produced as a result of fermentation make that food just absolutely delicious.
It can also make poisonous foods edible, like cassava, which is a staple across the world, but toxic to humans in raw form.
They would not be able to consume cassava without, at a minimum, cooking it. And really, fermentation is what breaks down those toxic compounds and makes that cassava able to be consumed by humans.
Brett says fermented foods are often hiding in plain sight all around us.
Something like a third of all the foods we consume, even in the Western world, have some type of fermented product in them.
Oh, wow.
Cheese is a fermented product. Bread is a fermented product. Coffee, chocolate, soy sauce, things that we use all the time.
In your book, you focus on the South. So tell me about the history of fermentation in the South specifically. Where did these techniques come from? What kind of fermented foods were being made? Who was making them?
I truly feel that Southern cuisine is the only truly unique and uniquely American cuisine in this country. And it's a real amalgam of not only the European traditions from the settlers that settled, but the Native Americans who lended their expertise and showed the European settlers how to use a lot of the native North American crops, to the enslaved peoples from West Africa and the Afro-Caribbeans. This amalgam of different cultures led us to create this truly unique Southern cuisine. And it was all of these peoples, too, who lent their expertise as far as the fermentation is concerned.
Brett says two quintessential Southern foods demonstrate this best. The first one is a salty staple found on many breakfast plates in the region.
Country ham. The English had a long tradition of curing meats, but their tradition was a wet brine. So they would cure in a wet brine their meat. So they'd, pack their meats into barrels full of these liquids filled with salt and spices and curing salts. Well, in the heat and humidity of tidal Virginia, those meats would just spoil. And so the Algonquins and then the Afro-Caribbeans taught them how to do a dry cure and a cold smoke of the meats to help dry that out and provide flavor and cure their meats that way and dry their meats that way.
The second example is maybe a little less well known, but just as foundational in many places. Chow chow.
And then with chow chow, for example, and a lot of the fermented vegetables either came from a lot of the Chinese rail workers in this area, or chow chow might have actually descended from the Acadians, the French who were kicked out of Nova Scotia during the French and Indian War, and then moved to Louisiana when they were looking for people to populate that new state or colony. And the fact that we didn't have refrigeration, we needed a way to preserve these foods outside of the growing season. And that's what ultimately fermentation gave us.
Yeah. Tell me what chow chow is, because I know that's like a famous Southern food, but I've actually never had it.
I liken chow chow to like the Southern version of kimchi. So kimchi is the Korean, everything condiment. There are 8 million different versions of kimchi, and it's served with pretty much every dish. And that's kind of what chow chow is. It's, a kitchen sink condiment where at the end of the growing season, before the first hard frost, you would just harvest all of the remaining vegetables in the garden, dice them up, add your salt, pack them into a jar, and let those ferment into chow chow, and then store that for the winter. And it really is good with everything. I mean, from burgers and hot dogs to, your beans and greens, and it can be sweet, it can be spicy, it can be savory, or anything in between.
But the list doesn't stop with chow chow. Coming up after the break, we find out how the climate and geography of the South has driven unique innovations in fermented food. Some that are delicious, and others, well...
hogs are notoriously difficult to milk. And, I've heard that pig cheese is not very tasty, so...
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. If you're anything like me, the holidays did a number on your healthy habits. Here's the thing. Everyone jumps into the new year buying new supplements, trying a new diet or workouts, but they completely ignore the most important basic thing: water. And Cove Pure is the perfect way to begin that fresh start. Even mild dehydration impacts energy, focus, and metabolism. And when you think about all the garbage that's in our water, you're starting behind the curve before you even begin. Cove Pure changes that immediately. Their ClearWave technology is certified to remove up to 99.9% of contaminants. It's the purest water you can get. Cove Pure makes it so easy to get pure water with the push of a button. So this year, make a New Year's resolution that sticks. Improve your health with clean water. Right now, you can get $200 off for a limited time if you use my link covepure.com/broadside. That's covepure.com/broadside to start this new year right.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
So, you talked about the colonial era, but in general, how have the climate and demographics of this region shaped what kind of foods are fermented and eaten here?
Yeah, so the climate was very different in the southern U.S. from like Europe, for example, especially northern Europe, where a lot of the settlers came from. And so crops like grains that were staples of European cuisine, like barley and wheat, could not be grown well in the South. And so we really had to learn to use corn. And so corn started showing up in lots of cuisines, and especially in a lot of fermented alcoholic beverages like corn whiskey and ultimately bourbon and Tennessee whiskey. You know, those are very unique whiskeys compared to any whiskey around the world because they're really the only ones that use corn as part of the initial base for the grains.
What about moonshine?
Yeah, well, moonshine is a corn whiskey. Yeah, it's just an unaged, single distilled corn whiskey.
And while southern grains and vegetables created an explosion of fermentation innovation, Brett says the region's livestock had the opposite effect in some cases.
We didn't raise cattle in the South historically. We raised hogs because they're cheaper and easier to raise in this climate. And so because we were raising hogs, we don't really have much of a history of cheese production in the South. Hogs are notoriously difficult to milk. I've heard that pig cheese is not very tasty. So
it exists.
Yeah, it does exist. It's not a typical cheese that is made, but people have made it, and I do talk about that in my book.
Is the sort of typical fermented food that we see in the South changing?
Oh, absolutely. Now that we have more people immigrating into the South and more cultures, we're seeing so many more Asian foods and Mexican and Latin American foods in the South, and a lot of these fusion types of cuisines that are kind of leaning on the rich culinary tradition that we have in the South and infusing kind of the flair of these newer cultures that are moving into the South. I mean, we're seeing just some amazing foods.
That growing influence is probably best represented by a story that Brett tells in his book about the creation of the American Miso Company. Based in tiny Rutherfordton, North Carolina, today it's the world's largest producer of organic miso, the traditional soybean paste used in many Japanese dishes.
I mean, it's crazy. You don't think of Rutherfordton, North Carolina. If you've ever been to Rutherfordton, North Carolina, you definitely don't see it as a miso capital of the country or the world. But it's an interesting story. So the founders were kind of early hippies. They loved it so much that they decided that they wanted to start producing miso in this country. And they actually traveled to Japan and studied under a miso master in Japan and lived with him for like 6 months and learned how to make miso.
The founders lived in Miami at the time.
And they had some investors, I believe, from the Boston area who were interested in investing in this company. And so they decided to meet in the middle. And that happened to be somewhere, in the wilds of North Carolina.
So random.
And this was just by happenstance, according to them. But the climate happened to be very similar to the climate in Japan, where they studied with the miso master. And, that's where they founded the American Miso Company right there in Rutherfordton.
And that's only one of the interesting things people are doing with Japanese-style fermentation in North Carolina. Brett and his students at Appalachian State are constantly in pursuit of the delicious umami flavor it provides.
For example, taking things like miso. Miso is traditionally made with soybeans, but really any substrate can be used. And so we love to use more traditional sort of Southern cuisines to make misos, like sweet potatoes, for example.
Oh.
Sweet potato miso is absolutely amazing. One of the best misos I've ever had. We've used nixtamalized corn, which is the fancy term for hominy, which is a very Southern way of treating corn. And then also things like cowpeas to make natto. You know, natto is a very traditional, stinky Japanese fermented soybean product, which I love, but it's definitely a love-or-hate type of product. But we love to use cowpeas to make natto.
Oh, that's fascinating. That passion has even gotten the lab into a sticky, or should I say stinky, situation.
We were making a batch of cowpea natto one day. I went out to run some errands that day, and I got a call from someone in student housing like, hey, are you all doing anything weird over there? I just wanted to check with you first before we call the fire department because we're afraid there's a gas leak or something because we're getting some really weird aromas over here. And I was like, no, I didn't smell anything weird this morning. I came back from my errands, and as soon as I walked through the door, I was like, the natto's getting ripe. And so I called them back, and I was like, yeah, that's us. But the fire department still came, and so
oh, no.
I was like, here's what they're smelling right here. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. That's it right there.
Last question. What's your favorite fermented food?
Geez.
You have to pick one.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's a really tough one because I love fermented foods so much. I'll give you a couple here. I mean, I'm definitely partial to beer. And so I do love beer, but I also love when we kind of distill that beer into whiskey. I really do love whiskey quite a lot, bourbon. But then from a food perspective, and not a particular food, but I am so partial to molds and particularly the aspergillus mold. And I know that is like the nerdiest thing that somebody could possibly say.
I wasn't expecting to hear that today, I'll be honest, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, but I just love aspergillus is such a cool mold and just the foods that can be made with aspergillus, like, miso and like sake and things like that. There are just so many different things that you can do with the aspergillus mold. And we're just scratching the surface of what we can do with it. So, yeah, that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
Great. This was great. Thank you so much for your time.
Good, you bet. Pleasure speaking with you, too.
Brett Taubman is the author of Southern Culture on the Fizz, which is out now via the University of North Carolina Press. This episode of The Broadside was produced by me, Anissa Khalifa, and edited by Jared Walker. The rest of our team includes producer Charlie Shelton Ormond and executive producer Wilson Sayre. The Broadside is a production of WUNC News in North Carolina and is part of the NPR network. If you have feedback or a story idea, you can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
What? This is the mindset.
Free.
This is the mantra.
Free.
This is the mindset.
With movies like Joe Dirt, Pixels, and 50 First Dates. This is awesome. And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
You're welcome.